Order. Now call Standing Committee on Public Accounts to order. My name is Kelly Regan. I'm the MLA for Bedford Basin, and I'm the chair of the committee. A reminder to everyone to place their phones on silent, and I'm going to ask committee members to introduce themselves, beginning with the member to my left, Mr. Young.
Good morning, everyone. Nolan Young, MLA for Shelburne.
MLA Taggart.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Taggart, MLA for Colchester North.
MLA McDonald.
Good morning, Johnny McDonald, MLA for Hants East.
MLA Sheehy Richard.
Good morning, everyone. Good to see you all. I'm Melissa Sheehy Richard, MLA for Hants West.
MLA Lachance.
Good morning, everyone. Lisa Lachance, Halifax, Citadel, Sable Island.
MLA LeBlanc.
Good morning, everyone. Susan LeBlanc, Dartmouth North.
MLA McGuire.
Hello, everybody. Brennan McGuire, Halifax Atlantic.
And MLA Barkhouse.
Good morning, everyone. Danielle Barkos, MLA for Chester St. Margaret's.
Thank you very much. And I would just like to welcome MLAs Lachance and Barkhouse to the committee as new members. I would also like to note that officials from the Auditor General's Office, in fact the AG herself, Legislative Council Office, and Legislative Committee's Office are in attendance as well. So we will be dealing today with committee business at today's meeting. There are no witnesses. So we have quite a bit of correspondence that's come in after we had requested information over the last while. We did have the 5-year highway improvement plan, and that was submitted by MLA Smith Ree, the June 14th, 2023 meeting. Does anyone have any conversation, concerns, or anything about that particular piece of correspondence? No? Okay. Thank you very much. Then we have Public Service Commission information requested from the June 7th meeting that had been requested by MLA Coombs. Is there any conversation on that, discussion on that particular item? Okay. We will make sure that goes to the website. A third piece of correspondence from the Liberal Caucus Office, the Leader of the Opposition, dated June 30th, 2023. In it, Mr. Churchill indicates that he has asked the Auditor General to investigate this alleged misuse of public funds pertaining to the advertising campaign and asked that this be brought forward at the next Public Accounts Committee meeting. Mr. McGuire.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Madam Chair, are you able to just read that letter for the new members, just in case that they were unable to? Can we just get I know it's a short letter, but are you able to read that for the committee? Just so that everybody's aware of what is said, because I do have some comments. And I just want to make sure that everybody's aware.
I can summarize it. I'm not going to go through it all. In it, Mr. Churchill says that he learned of the Nova Scotia government's $56,000 advertising campaign on the carbon levy that was scheduled to come into effect July 1st. He notes that he has significant concerns that this was an abuse of government power. If the intended purpose is to be educational, why are there several components that are misleading to the public? This includes, but is not limited to, failing to reference the federal rebate checks that all Nova Scotians will receive, referencing the carbon pricing scheme as a carbon tax when legally the system is a carbon levy, according to the Supreme Court of Canada, failing to educate the public on the provincial government's role by eliminating cap and trade in Bill 208 and triggering the carbon levy, and Mr. Churchill goes on to say, by only telling a fraction of the story, presenting misleading information, he's concerned that there has been a misuse of public funds by the Nova Scotia government in the pursuit of political gain. And then the line that was sort of the crux of the letter, which I've already stated. Mr. Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Federally speaking, I just want to go on the record here that this is a punitive tax on people. This liberal carbon tax is horrible. It's devastating. I talked to a trucker over the weekend, and he was telling me how the cost of everything is just inflated, and it's costing, it's costing Canadians, it's costing businesses, it's hurting the economy. And I'd like to just call on my colleagues to work with us to advocate to end this federal liberal carbon tax. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Mr. McGuire.
Well, I'm sure with the suggestions that I'm going to put forward today, that those members, having heard what the Vice Chair just said, will be in full agreement on the witnesses that I would like to propose on some of these things, because the theme is cooperation and nonpartisanship. I will say that I would like to ask the Auditor General to do an audit of Communications Nova Scotia based on the following. The Public Service Act, Chapter 376 of the Revised Statutes of 1989. 16C says that the role of Communications Nova Scotia is to ensure that communications from the government of the province are timely, accurate, factual, and a respectful manner, along with objective and not directed at promoting partisan interests. So we know that they spent $56,000 on partisan ad, and that was, by definition, as partisan as you get, blaming the federal Liberal government. And right here in the Public Service Act, Chapter 376, they literally broke the act. They literally broke the act. It's also the objectives and purpose of the office, as for 251B, is to provide centralized delivery of communication services with respect to non-partisan communications from the government of the province, including without limiting the generality of the foregoing. So there has been examples in the past where governments have done this, and there has been repercussions. And I look back to, it's a long time ago, but the Dexter government in particular had put road signs on the side of the roads that said brought to you by the Dexter government, and everything that they built, some of us may remember those signs, they were everywhere. And they were told that Communications Nova Scotia was not to be used in a nonpartisan or in a partisan way. And they had to remove those signs. Now, I, again, would like to figure out why we are back to this kind of communications from Communication Nova Scotia. This is, as per the Act, has been broken several times, and public purse money has been spent in breaking the Act. So I would ask that we do an audit of Communication in Nova Scotia on behalf of this topic to figure out who, what, where, what, and why. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, so I have a speakers list going now. Mr. Young, Mr. Taggart, Ms. LeBlanc.
He likes that.
And when you said you would ask, what you meant?
I'd like to put a motion.
Thank you very much, Mr. McGuire. Okay, Mr. Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I got a question to the Auditor General first is, have you received that letter? And I mean, all of us know that the Auditor General can audit whatever the Auditor General wishes to audit. It's completely in her purview. So I guess I'll turn it over to see if we...
Ms. Adair.
I can't say for certain I have not, but I don't recall receiving the letter.
You got lost in the mail.
Okay, Mr. Taggart?
I just have to say, I cannot for the life of me understand why this is before us. And then is what, so they sent, the leader of the opposition sent a letter. I would have thought he would have sent it to the AG. But anyway, it tells me that somebody's totally out of touch with reality in terms of where Nova Scotia stand on this carbon tax. And to want to bring, it's just so harmful for so little gain to rural Nova Scotians. It is unbelievable. And to want to, I would have thought that they would have realized, given the the reaction of and it's savage, the reaction of Nova Scotians, in particular rural Nova Scotians, to the carbon tax, and the way it discriminates against those that have to travel to work, that have to drive a car to get to their job and to their doctor's appointments or to their banking or whatever, is just it's unbelievable. I just can't imagine that they would even bother to even want to tell of this again. I guess they're that nervous about their federal cousins. They want to keep protecting them, but I think it was a huge mistake, and I think that we should just carry on and forget about this, and we should be supportive of the people in Nova Scotia in their desire to be rid of the carbon tax. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taggart. Ms. LeBlanc.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not going to get into the ins and outs of this conversation because Public Accounts Committee is not the place to debate policy, but where it is the purview of the Public Accounts Committee to ask the Auditor General to look into something. And so I just want to say that given that what is this act called? The Public Service Act is quite clear about regulations. I think this is an appropriate request of the Auditor General, and I support the idea of asking the Auditor General. But I do think that Mr. Young is correct. The Auditor General can audit whatever she pleases, but I think that if there's a formal request made by the Public Accounts Committee, that brings some weight. So I would ask my honourable colleague to put forward a motion if he wants this to actually go forward.
Thank you. Mr. McGuire, I will ask you to table those documents so that they're available for folks to see. I think they're in the pile on your right. Mr. McGuire.
So I would like to correct what Mr. the MLA for
You can say Mr. Taggart.
Mr. Taggart said.
Yeah.
This isn't about the carbon tax. I thought it was very clear. This is about a government that broke the policies and the act. They spent $56,000 of government money on partisan ads. It doesn't matter if this was the carbon tax, the fishing industry, the construction industry. It doesn't matter what it was. They broke the law. They broke the policy, and they broke the act. And in the past, we've seen governments who have spent money breaking this act had to pay the piper. And this government should not be given a pass because of a policy which 2/3 of the parties in the Nova Scotia legislature voted against. Okay, so it doesn't matter what the policy is. The fact is that the law was broken. And I would say, would you have the same reaction if somebody broke the law and you say, oh, they just only stole something? They stole something that nobody likes. The truth is that $56,000 was spent knowingly and willingly, and Communications Nova Scotia, which is a nonpartisan arm of this government, sent out very partisan attack ads. Therefore, it was broken, and I would like to formally request in a motion that the Public Accounts Committee request that the Auditor General look into this spending and the partisan act of Communication Nova Scotia.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald, I believe you have a comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a couple quick questions. One is, are you directing or are you asking the Auditor General to see if she should? Thank you. And I'll take that as an answer. Thank you. Yeah. So, but the point is, Communications Nova Scotia, the last time I looked, is to get information out to the public. And that was a federal liberal carbon tax. And I think everybody will remember, I've always said it that way. That's how they said it. The point that, people can infer which party it was, it's the federal liberal carbon tax. They were explaining that is coming up. I will tell you, when it comes to, my colleagues are 100% right, and I believe, actually you would agree, the costs have gone through the roof. That's why inflation's going where it is. It's 20 cents is added, basically, to the fuel. And guess what? It gets moved by rail and truck, which all use fuel. If people are wondering why groceries are going up, because gas is going up. and everything, and it's not going to go down. And as this federal carbon tax gets added and keeps getting increased, inflation is not going to come down. So I just want to make it clear, like, it appears from the way it's being worded, Communications Nova Scotia, in my view, did their job. They let them know, here's a federal liberal carbon tax, so that's the issue. So for me, I just don't have any time for dealing with this, to be honest, because I don't see it's a problem. Thank you.
I think Mr. McGuire did share information from the particular bill that outlines that it is supposed to be nonpartisan, accurate, that kind of thing. So I think that is in fact where the question lies right now, is we have, or lays rather, right now, we have some people who think it was accurate and some people who believe it was not. Mr. McGuire.
So I'm going to be very clear for the 4 people on that side and the one next to me. We did not support the carbon tax, but we voted against it. Do you not remember that? We voted against it in the Nova Scotia legislature. I do not. And that was very clear from the leader of this party. Secondly, you proved my point. On one hand, you said the federal liberal carbon tax, and on the next hand, you said the federal carbon tax. There's a word missing there, and that word is a partisan word, and that's what it was used as, a partisan attack ad. Nova Scotia, the Communication Nova Scotia was directed by the Premier of Nova Scotia and others to have, to put out partisan attack ads, and that's what this was. And in fact, during the by-election, they were told to take them down because they were partisan and they were misleading. So what we're saying is, I don't care what the policy is. This isn't about the policy. This isn't about anything but federal or provincial dollars were spent to break the rules and regulations of the Public Services Act, Chapter 376 of the revised statutes, which is very clear what you can and cannot spend money on. Very clear. And nobody in this table, nobody around this table, or nobody on the top floor there gets to decide if they follow the rules or not. The rules are there for a reason. They broke the rules. Communications Nova Scotia, we need to find out why these rules were broken and how much money was actually spent. Was it more than $56,000? Was it less than $56,000? That is Nova Scotia public dollars that was spent. And again, I will say, this is not about the policy. Again, so if you want to comment on the policy, go ahead. This is actually about the breaking of the act.
Okay, Ms. Barkhouse.
Oh, it's me. Hi. Stop it. So I'm new. Obviously, it's my first day. I haven't had a chance to read the Public Service Act, and I just got MLA Churchill's email. But, you know, I'm reading his 2 points here, failing to reference the federal rebate. Like, his points are actually partisan. When you look at them, like failing to educate the public on the provincial government's role to eliminating a cap and trade, like, it's so partisan. It's actually kind of half crude. I would like to have a moment to read this before we go, the Public Service Act, before we, because I don't know it yet, honestly.
It's thick.
It's thick. It's a very, very thick bill. The part that pertains to Communications Nova Scotia is a couple of pages. It's not it's not that difficult. Any further? Mr. Young, you can read Ms. Barkhouse while Mr. Young is speaking, and then Ms. Sheehy-Richard.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. It seems like every time we're talking about a carbon tax, the NDP always gets silent. I'd like to give them the opportunity to, you know, maybe on the record for Nova Scotians on how, if you support the carbon tax or if you don't, I'll give you that opportunity.
Duly noted. Ms. Sheehy-Richard.
So as MLA McGuire says that they voted against the carbon tax, so I am kind of confused here talking about mixed signals. Then if that is in fact the case, then why does the leader of your party then write a letter concerned about an ad that is indicating, so we're calling on your leader, Zach Churchill, just to tell Nova Scotians, which it's wishy-washy where you stand, whether he supports his federal colleagues or whether he doesn't.
Order, Ms. Sheehy-Richard. The member knows that that is not under the purview of this particular committee. So we're going to move on from there. I do see MLA Lachance, and then Mr. McDonald, I see you as well.
Thank you. So I think, just coming in to support our previous comments, so the question is not about the carbon tax, and it's not about any other policy that we're considering. It's not about, say, for instance, how we're going to fight hate and discrimination against trans folks today and every day in Nova Scotia. So we actually aren't talking about policy. I mean, if you want to talk about policies, we can go there, but I don't actually think this is what this committee is for.
It's not.
So what we are is talking about whether or not a central act of our government, the Public Service Act, has been contravened, and whether or not, that's the question. So we're asking the question, and we support that motion.
Thank you, MLA Lachance. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So for the purpose of this meeting, I would have loved to have this motion before, so I could have read it and looked at it, and then I would have had a time to revise it. So in all honesty...
So I'm just going to stop you there.
Oh, no.
I'm just going to stop I'm allowed to stop you. So we've had this conversation repeatedly ad nauseum. This is not council. You don't necessarily get motions ahead of time. Yeah, this is not municipal government. Sometimes we have to act in the moment. So I'm not going to go over that ground again, which we've gone over numerous times, okay? Also, that piece of correspondence was sent out to all members. So all members had the opportunity to read that when it was sent out last Friday? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Last Friday and today. This is not news. So I just want to be really clear that our clerk did her work and sent it out to members. Mr. McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So if I can finish that, and by the way, I did read the letter, and I think, I'm not sure, I might have got it twice. I don't think.
You did.
I thought so.
3 times.
Okay, so I read the letter. I read the letter. I knew it was in it. All I'm saying is that if you're going to quote sections of it into a motion, all I said is it would have been nice. I didn't say you didn't do it, whatever. However, due to the fact that how big this document is, right, I move that this decision be tabled until next PAC meeting.
Ms. Barkhouse.
I was going to suggest the same thing because, like with everything in government, you might read section C of 16, but there's always subsection D of 18. And so I have this, but I want the big document, which is going to be scary, isn't it? MLA, or even chair, I should say.
Well, as most of it does not deal with that particular portion of government, it won't be that difficult to get through. I want to assure the honourable member. Any further discussion? We have a motion on the floor. Did we have a... I put a motion. We have a motion from Mr. McGuire, and we have a motion from Mr. McDonald. Right?
I think the clerk wants to explain where we're at.
No, I think we have to vote on the motion to defer.
Correct.
Because that is an amendment? No, it's a motion.
It's not an amendment.
Okay.
It's a superseding motion.
Mr. McGuire, just to clarify.
Just to clarify, sorry, are you asking to postpone the motion so that you can read the Public Service Act? Is that what's happening here?
Mr. McDonald.
Because there will be a quiz.
Mr. McDonald.
So so I can get a copy of the motion, I'll have time to read those sections into it, and that's why I literally did say the next meeting. So I'm not asking it to be deferred indefinitely. All I'm saying is that because you're talking about, to the chair's point, a huge document that I'm going to want to review, although it's probably, most people would realize it's probably going to be bad to quiz me because most people look bad when they do it. But that's that. And just for sure, table and defers are the only two that take supersede over it. Otherwise, it would have been an amendment. A table or defer are the only two that supersede it.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay. Mr. McGuire.
So can you put in the motion to postpone till next week?
That's what he said.
Okay.
He did say that. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So we have before us a motion to defer action on this particular topic, the letter of the Leader of the Opposition, until next week.
Next week's in camera, so,
Exactly
yeah.
2 weeks.
So in fact, what we are talking about is not deferring it till next week, but for 2 weeks.
It's the next public pack.
Next public PAC meeting. Okay? So that's what we're voting on now. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. Okay.
The next correspondence.
Now, Office of the Auditor General, 2022-23 Performance Report and Business Plan. I have a letter from Ms. Adair asking me to table these documents with the Public Accounts Committee at its earliest convenience. And there is also a link to the complete version of the audited financial statements as well as the documents that the AG sent to me. And they can be found at the AG's website at www.oag-ns.ca. So for all of the members, I am tabling that with the committee. Okay. And then we move on to the Department of Public Works. There was information requested from the June 14th meeting. Is there any discussion on that correspondence? Mr. McGuire?
Give me a quick, what was the information that was requested? I apologize. My brain's a little foggy right now.
It was a selection of quality management of bridge projects in central and western districts and contaminated, not contaminants sites, but contaminated sites. So it's sort of a big document there that came and, are you clear on that? Yeah. Okay. Any discussion on the correspondence? Okay. Now, we have also a response from the Department of Municipal Affairs and Housing dated June the 1st, and it was deferred from the June 7th meeting, I think, because Mr. Young was chairing and I was not in attendance. And I had some questions about the letter that came back from, I believe, Deputy LaFlèche. And thank you. In the letter, it refers to overage and underabsorption, which is like we underspent or overspent, or civil servant speak for same, but it doesn't indicate which it is. So I do think we need to go back to that department and say, okay, that's great, but were you underspent or overspent? Did you actually did it achieve what it was supposed to achieve? And I also noted that the budget took a big jump when housing went over to municipal affairs, but only 2 persons, according to what they had sent to us, were added. So I would just like to write a letter to the department to say, can you please explain what's going on here, because I didn't understand the response in its entirety. Is the committee okay with me just responding back and asking for clarity on those points? I'm seeing not, so I will do that. The record of decision from the May 3rd subcommittee, members have been provided with the record of decision for the May 3rd subcommittee meeting. There's one remaining item to be dealt with. It was letters to departments with outstanding recommendations.
There are two there. They're just those two. They're the ones that the committee wanted
Okay.
to be dealt with.
So we have the Department of Communities, Culture, Tourism, and Heritage, and Finance and Treasury Board read the 2018 grant programs, and then the Workers' Compensation Board May 2019 WCB claims management. So the question is do we have a motion to write letters to those departments and/or entities to provide an update on those particular on the situation with those? Mr. Young, did I see a hand up?
I'm just trying to remember what. You're just asking to write a letter?
Yep, just to
They're in front of you.
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
It's at the bottom of the Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedures, May 3rd, 2023. Ms. LeBlanc.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that that was just something we didn't get to because we ran out of time, and it was basically like that these reports now won't have more, or the follow-up reports for these recommendations will be far in the future, and so we were just going to write letters to get reports back to see where things were with those follow-up recommendations. So I make the motion that we do write letters to the Department of Communities, Culture, Tourism, and Heritage, and Finance and Treasury Board regarding the 2018 grant programs, and also the Workers' Compensation Board regarding the May 2019 WCB claims management report.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Okay, there we go. We will write that letter. So then we come to the record of decision from the September 15th subcommittee meeting. The subcommittee reached decisions in relation to witnesses for upcoming Auditor General reports. So I'll now open the floor for discussion. And so what you want to have in your hand is Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedures, September 15th, 2023, record of decision. There's a lot of paper here today, and I'm sorry about that, but that's what happens when we're catching up on all of that, right? So you can see on there witnesses and topics there. So is Mr. Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a motion. I move that for the topic of ambulance ground services, the following witnesses be called: Deputy Minister, Department of Health and Wellness, and representatives. Emergency Medical Care Incorporated, President and CEO, and the Nova Scotia Health Intern, President and CEO.
So we have a motion on the floor from Mr. Young, Ms. LeBlanc, then Mr. McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm fine with removing the names from that list of people. I understand that things change around, so those changes are fine with me. I would like to add or amend that motion that we add a representative from the Paramedics Union, the IUOE Local 727, which is here on the record of decisions from the last meeting, but somehow didn't make it into the member's motion.
So to be clear, what Ms. LeBlanc is saying is that record of decision from the Subcommittee on Agendas and Procedures did also include IUOE. And so that's an amendment that she is making to Mr. Young's motion. Mr. McGuire.
Yeah, I would support that. I think we can't have a conversation without representation from the union and the ambulance or the EMTs. It just doesn't make sense. Like, the topic is literally ground ambulance service. So audit is determined if ground ambulance service are meeting the needs of Nova Scotians in a cost-effective manner. Who knows more than the actual members? They can tell you what's happening on the ground, they can tell you where the deficiencies are, and they can tell you where the investments need to be made. We know that. We do. And I think it's quite insulting to have a discussion about the ground ambulance services and where investments need it and where investment has been made without having the other side there. The people that you're investing in, the individuals that you're investing in, and if this government votes down not allowing the people that drive the ambulances, the EMTs, if they vote down not allowing them a voice at the table when it comes to public accounts and investments in them, then shame on them. There's nothing to hide here. Allow them to come forward. If this is about truly finding answers to the solutions, then let them come forward. If this is about protecting yourselves and your premier, then vote against it.
I was saying, I think it was in subcommittee. I feel like we've had back-to-back. Oh, yes, I can't say that. Thank you, thank you. So I will just note that what we have is a possibility here that when we write to witnesses, witnesses, that we note what the raison d'etre, sorry, still having trouble with words, so of public accounts is. And we're here not to talk about policy, we're here to talk about the spending of money, does it achieve the objectives, etc. So perhaps we can guide our witnesses a little bit in their preparations of opening remarks and things like that, so that we can, in fact, I know it's not how this committee has always functioned, but in fact, if we can focus people on the money, how it's being spent, how it's being delivered, etc. Is the service meeting the stated goals of the government, of the department, of the service? Then I think we may be able to allay some concerns that we will be wandering off in areas where we should not be, and also that the chair can also be a little directive with witnesses that, well, we don't want to cut people off. At the same time, we do want to ensure that we're focusing on the mandate of public accounts. And so maybe we can have our cake and eat it too. We can have witnesses that can point out ways where the money can be spent more effectively without getting into the issue of policy. So I'm just going to put that out there for the committee to consider. Mr. Young.
Yeah. Just talking about the mandate of PAC, like PAC's mandate is specifically dedicated to past expenses of government, and who better to discuss past expenses of government would be the department of the deputies. So I will not be supporting the amendment.
Mr. McGuire.
And again, like we are encouraging this witness to come forward knowing that there will be some criticism of the previous government. We know that. But I find it very ironic that they're saying that there cannot be a voice for the EMTs at the table because they're not part of a government department. Yet, we're going to hear shortly how they want to add NSCC and other witnesses who have the same type of relationship. So on one hand, they're saying, we want these witnesses because they're potentially beneficial to government, and on the other side, they're saying they're not. And again, I go back to, I think it's very, very insulting. This is a government that was elected on health care. This is a government that has said they will do everything to fix health care, everything but listen to the voices of the people on the ground. There's no harm in allowing them here. The chair can direct them and say, you can't talk about policy. just talk about investment. Just talk about the money side of it. And they can sit there and they can say, like, the government can say, we invested $10 million in this, and wouldn't you want to hear from the people on the ground saying, well, that's great, but it didn't actually serve the purpose, or it did serve the purpose, so thank you. And that's what we need to do. We need to make sure that all voices are heard when it comes to investment, because investment isn't just about somebody sitting up on the 7th floor signing a check. It's about where the money goes and how it gets there and the impact it has.
Ms. LeBlanc.
Thank you. I just was wondering if, like, only the Auditor General knows what's in the report, right? It's not been released yet, or it was released tomorrow?
No,
Next week. And so we're discussing it in camera next Wednesday, but I'm wondering if the Auditor General could maybe give us some hint whether or not she thinks that this addition, the IUOE representative, would be appropriate for the public meeting.
Ms. Adair.
So the paramedics are definitely a key component of the ambulance services audit. Whether it's appropriate to call the union, I think that's the prerogative of the committee, not me. The names that we suggested were subject to the audit and or auditees of the audit, and that did not include the union specifically.
Mr. McGuire.
I will say, going on my own past experience, going in my 11th year on public accounts, that there is precedent for this. There's always been precedent for this. No government has hidden from bringing the unions and bringing the people that are directly impacted by the finances of this province forward. And I will say that it does a great disservice to those people that you all call heroes if you're refusing to allow them to have a voice. And actions speak louder than words. You know, the witnesses that are coming forward cannot speak on behalf of the people on the ground. You know who can? The people on the ground. The union leaders and the leaders within the EMTs who face this every single day and hear from their, and I'll give you an example. Like, I see some people shaking their heads over there, but I'll give an example. Because we, in the past, have been on other committees where we've brought in organizations, and I think about a military affairs, where we brought in other organizations that were kind of loosely, but they gave us fantastic information about what veterans were going through. And we never would have heard that without them. And this is exactly what's happening here. And a big part of this, whether anyone wants to talk about it or not, is recruitment. And being able to recruit new people to this profession. And we know that government officials are going to say, doing a great job. Money's being invested, 10 million, 5 million, 6 million, 8 million, 1 billion, bazillion, trillion. They're going to say that. That's what they're going to say. But we need to hear from the union leaders and the leaders on the ground why we have a recruitment issue, because we know we have a recruitment issue. If pay is significant enough to attract, and what is happening on the ground for members, because we know that there is, when it comes to long-term and short-term disabilities, that it adversely affects EMTs. And this, again, has a cost associated, a human cost, but also a financial cost to this province. Most importantly, in the human cost. But it also has a financial cost to this province. So why would we not want to get to the meat and potatoes of this? Why would we not want to hear from everyone so that you can walk out of here better informed? Better informed. And again, I agree with this, knowing that the previous government is going to be open to criticism. And I'm okay with that. Let's do it. Let's put this stuff aside, let's hear the real answers, and let's do what this committee was meant to do, which is actually come up with answers and solutions.
Mr. Young, then Mr. Taggart.
Yeah.
Mr. Young.
I hear the member across, and you keep mentioning in the past, and we're changing stuff, and I have two things. First is just to clear the record, I'd request MLA McGuire to table all the witnesses and the public accounts. I think you said you've been here for 10 years. Because of my quick jurisdictional scan in the Liberal time, October 9th, 2019, just Department of Community Services, Department of Agriculture, Department of Justice, November 13th, 2019, Office of the Auditor General and Department of Finance, December 11th, 2019, Office of the Auditor General, January 29th, 2020, Department of Transportation, Infrastructure Renewal, March 11th, 2020, Department of Lands and Forests and Contaminated Sites. Then I could go on. And I'll go back to the NDP's time here. October 12th, 2011, Chief Information Office, October 19th, 2011, Department of Labor and Advanced Education, October 26th, 2011, Department of Health and Wellness, November 2nd, 2011, Department of Community Services and Early Childhood Development. So I have a whole list of past topics, and I'm not saying that MLA McGuire's points in his passion isn't important, but this is not the mandate of PAC, and there's other committees for this, and I respect the independence of the Auditor General, and will be supporting the witnesses that she's chosen. Thank you.
Remember that when you vote down for other witnesses.
Mr. Taggart.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I just have to say that I do agree with one thing that MLA McGuire is that the Department of Health is doing a great job, and to try and to fix. Yes, you did. To fix the many. It's enhanced. It's enhanced. Okay. Trying to fix the many challenges that they were handed a couple of years ago. But I got a real problem trying to understand how a union whose job it is to support its employees. It could care, really, I expect, I shouldn't say could care less, that's probably an exaggeration, but its main goal is not to support or understand government programs. Its goal is to support it and increase the benefits of its membership. So how in the heck would that be considered to be, important in this case? The people that we hand the money to, it's my understanding, we as a government hand the money to the Emergency Medical Care Incorporated. That's the organization. They're the people that should have to and be able to explain what's going on in that organization. So for us to give a platform for the union to come in and start negotiating for the next contract is a little bit beyond what I believe is what this mandate of this is for. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taggart. So I'm going to call the question now. I think we have discussed this particular topic ad nauseum. So
Susan's amendment first.
Ms. LeBlanc's amendment, which was to add IUOE Local 727 representative to the list of potential witnesses as proposed by MLA Young. All those in favor of Ms. LeBlanc's amendment, please say aye.
Aye. Recorded vote.
We have a request here for a recorded vote. So I will ask the clerk to do the roll call.
Mr. Young.
No.
MLA Taggart.
No.
MLA MacDonald.
No.
MLA Sheehy Richard.
No.
MLA Barkhouse.
No.
MLA McGuire.
Yes.
No. MLA LeBlanc.
Yes.
MLA LaChance.
Yes.
And the chair, Ms. Regan.
Yes.
4 yeses, 5 noes.
So the motion is defeated. Now we move on to the original motion from Mr. Young, that the witnesses be the Department of Health and Wellness, the Deputy Minister, and the Executive Director. The emergency medical care, did I? No, you didn't have the Executive Director, did you?
Do you want me to read it again?
Go right ahead.
Okay. Just for clarity, my motion was I move that for the topic of ambulance ground services, the following witnesses be called: Deputy Minister, Department of Health and Wellness, and representatives. Emergency Medical Care, Inc., President and CEO, and COO. I have CEO.
It's out.
COO, sorry, okay, perfect. And Nova Scotia Health Intern, President and CEO.
Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. So now we will move on to the next topic that came forward from Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedures from September 15th. The Department of Finance and Treasury Board, the topic was the 2023 report of the Auditor General Financial, and the witnesses are Department of Finance and Treasury Board. That would be the Deputy Minister, Executive Director, Government Accounting, and Executive Director, Fiscal Policy, Economics, and Budgetary Planning. Would anyone like to make a motion? Mr. Young.
Yeah, I move that for the topic Department of Finance and Treasury Board, the following witnesses be called: the Deputy Minister, Deputy of Finance and Treasury Board, and representatives.
And so that is, just to clarify, it was the report of the Auditor General Financial, and the Department of Finance and Treasury Board would be the department you're calling, and it's just Deputy Minister and officials. Okay. All right, Ms. LeBlanc.
I'm trying to be the adult in the room here, but I can't help but notice that Mr. Young just recently in the discussion talked about how we should be, adhering to the Auditor General's recommendations on who we bring in, and the Auditor General clearly recommended specifically the Executive Director of Government Accounting and Executive Director Fiscal Policy, Economics, and Budgetary Planning. Why don't we just be specific about who we're calling and make sure that those three individuals are in the room?
Any further discussion? Mr. McGuire.
Yeah, I agree with the member for Dartmouth North. At 9:57, the member for Shelburne said he respects, today, 9:57 today, he said we need to respect the Auditor General and the witnesses and the recommendations. So we can't, on one hand, say we need to respect the Auditor General and bring forward the list of witnesses, and on the other hand, not. So this is what has been extremely frustrating for me, is that we're talking out of both sides of our mouth here, Madam Chair. We're saying one thing when it benefits government, and we're saying another when it doesn't. We're saying that you can't have witnesses outside of a department, yet they're going to call for witnesses outside of a department. They're saying that we need to respect the Auditor General and her decision, and yet saying, well, we don't agree with the witnesses. We know that some of these lists, they're going to try to get rid of everybody on the list and have it down to one person. So I just don't get how you can sit here while being filmed and on TV and say one thing, and then 50 seconds later, 9:57, 8 minutes later, say and do something completely different. So I will support the member for Dartmouth North's motion. I think
didn't make a motion.
Oh, sorry, the suggestion that, and we'll move forward with it.
Mr. Young.
Yeah, just to clarify, I mean, with the changes and stuff and people moving around, I try to define it to within the department. I'm fine with the witnesses. I was just cleaning up the language, so I wasn't talking out of both sides of my mouth. I was just trying to just be specific with the position.
Well, with that in mind, would you like to amend your motion so that those particular positions are included in the witness list? I think we have to. So as we received from, I just want to make sure to amend his own motion.
Just unanimous consent.
We just need a unanimous consent, correct? Right? Okay. That's exactly what I was checking on, Gordon. Mr. Young, would you like to ask for unanimous consent to do that? Okay.
Agreed. Agreed.
Okay, so Mr. Young has indicated that he is fine to move to the subcommittee, to move that we call on the topic of the 2023 Report of the Auditor General Financial from the Department of Finance and Treasury Board, the Deputy Minister, the Executive Director of Government Accounting, and the Executive Director of Fiscal Policy, Economics, and Budgetary Planning. Okay, that's what we're, do we have unanimous consent for that change?
Well, it's now a motion, so.
He had to ask for unanimous consent to change his original motion. So I'm checking, do we have unanimous consent? All right, I'm seeing nods all around. Okay, now we can vote on that motion. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. There we go. We have two topics. It's a Christmas miracle. I don't think I did that.
Yeah, you did.
Did I? Okay. All right. All right. So, record of decision from the September 20th subcommittee. The subcommittee met this morning prior to the public meeting. Members have been provided with a record of decision from this meeting. So we may want to fish that out of your pile of papers. So I will open the floor for discussion. Ms. LeBlanc.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Committee members will see that the record of decision is that the topic, topic selection topic is investments in affordable housing programming, including student housing needs. And the witnesses would be the DM of Municipal Affairs and Housing, a representative from Affordable Housing Association of Nova Scotia, the chair of the Executive Panel on Housing in the HRM, the Deputy Minister of Community Services, a representative from ADSN for Women and Children, and a rep from the North End Community Health Center, and the DM of Advanced Education. Madam Chair, I would like to make a motion that we split this topic into two. So, one topic would be investments in affordable housing, including student housing needs, and the witnesses would be the the Deputy Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, a representative from Affordable Housing Association of Nova Scotia, the Chair of Executive Panel on Housing in the HRM, and the Deputy Minister of Advanced Education. A second topic would be investments in initiatives to end homelessness. And the witnesses would be the Deputy Minister of Department of Community Services, a representative from ADSM for Women and Children, and a representative from the North End Community Health Center. So I'll speak on that motion. I think it's quite clear that basically for the people that weren't in the subcommittee that I'm proposing that we take this very large proposed topic and we divide it into two topics and essentially divide the witnesses so that they're more appropriate to the topic. So housing and affordable housing is actually a very different topic than homelessness in Nova Scotia, and they are related. Because if there's a lack of affordable housing, then we see an increase in homelessness. But they are not, there's not a direct correlation or a direct relationship. Both are extremely important. And all through Nova Scotia, in every person's constituency, we are seeing a huge increase in core housing need and in the either housing precariousness, or we're seeing an increase in people actually living rough and living or in shelters. So our numbers of people homeless are increasing everywhere in the province, and our number of people and the numbers of people living in core housing need or in housing precarity are also shooting up. This is a topic that is being discussed all over the country, and I would probably dare say all over the continent and the world. We hear this, that this is a global issue, that this is a national issue, but this is very much a Nova Scotia issue. In my community of Dartmouth North, I cannot even begin to describe to you how many people come into my office now per week who are homeless, which wasn't very, like, mostly we serve people who have homes in Dartmouth North who are in danger of losing them, but now people who are homeless, who cannot access services anywhere else, are coming to my office. Yeah, Friday there were 4 people, 4 new clients, new people. We have billions of, well, okay, I exaggerate, hundreds of people who are facing homelessness in the next 6 months because of rent evictions and new developments, being redeveloped. And there are all kinds of buildings going up, but none of them have affordable housing units dedicated. So this issue is going to get worse. It is not going to get better. It's going to get worse before it gets better, for sure. And it is appropriate for the Public Accounts Committee to be looking at these topics in depth and to make sure that government funding or government spending on both affordable housing and on the homelessness issue is appropriate and is effective, and all of the things that we're supposed to be doing at public accounts. So I implore my honorable colleagues at this committee to accept my motion to split these topics in 2 and to accept my proposal for witnesses. This is not a partisan issue. This is an issue that every one of us is facing in our communities. Homelessness and affordable housing is not about partisanship. It is not about, well, I mean, it is about policy, obviously, but it's not about, I'm not bringing this topic forward to show how great my party is at these things. It is to get some answers and to figure out what the government is doing about these very important issues. Lives are at stake. Healthcare is at stake. Mental health is at stake, and the economy is at stake when we talk about homelessness and we talk about affordable housing. Thank you.
Mr. McGuire, then Mr. Young. Mr. McGuire.
So I definitely support this motion. I think that it is the #1 issue facing everybody in this room. Everybody in this room is the housing crisis in their community, the price of housing, and I think it's just too big of a topic to discuss in an hour and a half, and for us to have 27 minutes each to ask questions. And we just don't know where this is going. And one of the things that I want to do is, I think the member for Dartmouth North is correct. Like, I face housing issues each and every day. It's easily the #1 issue. But we need to know where the plan is for student housing. Like, these things were supposed to be released. The housing plan was supposed to be released. And I will say this, what's happening now is the government is deflecting and pointing blame it's becoming a common thing. And I will go back to a September 7th article in CBC where Nova Scotia Minister says international students need to take responsibility for finding housing and jobs. This is what Minister Wong said. So you're an international student coming to a new country with a new language and a new culture, and it's not on the universities. It's no longer on the universities or the government to take care of those individuals. We are in the middle of a housing crisis. We need to call these universities to task. I'm sorry, but we need to bring them here in front of the public accounts, because a lot of money is being put in the public purse on the back of international students. And we know that. I don't know if people are aware of the difference in tuition. It is monstrous. between what they pay and what they don't pay. And for the individual in charge of post-secondary education to say it's not our fault, it's on those students, is offensive. And that's having an impact. So I agree, we're seeing it over and over and over. You just have to walk around Halifax. There was somebody that posted a, someone sent it to me, a TikTok video where he had been out of HRM, he had left Halifax 4 or 5 years ago, and he came back, and he walked around and showed all the homelessness that's going on in this city now, and it's happening in each and every one of your jurisdictions now. So this is a big issue, and if you are truly believe in working together to figure this out, and if you truly are going to show leadership on this, housing is a human right. It is a human right. Then instead of lumping it all in and creating some kind of jambalaya where the media can only concentrate on one thing and nobody can all, there's just mass confusion and we just throw as many things at it as once so that we can get it over with and say we talked about it. Let's actually separate this, have the discussion when it comes to homelessness and student housing. These are two totally different and interconnected, but totally different topics. We should be able to talk about homelessness and the housing issue for Nova Scotia residents on one hand, and then talk about international students and what they're facing on the other hand, because the international students also have an impact on the public purse. They're having an impact on people finding homes, and they're having an impact on attracting Nova Scotians. If you're an international student, and I don't know, Madam Chair may know this, but the percentage of retention, if you just throw them into the meat grinder and there's no place for them to stay, they're not going to stay, and they're not going to continue to contribute to this economy. And for them to say it's not our responsibility, well, if it's not your responsibility, then maybe you should get out of the business of attracting international students if you're putting them in unsafe and dangerous situations. It is on the government. It is on the government. Universities are publicly funded, and you have a responsibility to ensure that every person in this province is safe and has access to housing.
Okay, Mix Lachance.
I think there was someone else ahead of me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Young, you're ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to call a brief recess.
Okay, we have 5 minutes. We'll come back at 25. We'll do 25, okay? 25 after. Order? Order? It's now 10:25. I call the committee to order. So we have before us the motion from Ms. LeBlanc to separate the witnesses that came forward from the Subcommittee on Agenda and Procedures. So, Mr. Taggart.
So we're very supportive of understanding the challenges and oh, sorry, yeah.
Oh, you know what, I apologize to everyone. Yes, Mix Lachance. Mix Lachance, you are up.
Great, thank you. So I think, I don't doubt that we all share the commitment to addressing both affordable housing and homelessness in Nova Scotia, and that they are, in fact, complex and distinct issues, and really deserve a lot of our attention. I think what I'm hearing from people on the doorstep and in my emails are just like, where is the urgency? Why, like, this is a crisis at sort of all levels. And so I think, we really need to be focused. And if I think about some of the specific issues, that really deserve some attention in either area, when I'm thinking about affordable housing, I really think that our actual, the goals of this current government are at stake. So issues like housing for workers, we're hearing across the province in so many sectors, from small businesses to larger operations, folks unable to find people to come to work for them because those workers can't find housing, and this is at all income levels. We have really strong immigration/migration targets to encourage population growth. Again, I think I'm starting to hear anecdotally people, starting to give up and go to other parts of Canada. I'm sorry, but I'm having a lot of trouble thinking with the whispering in my ear.
Please continue, Ms. Lachance. No, actually, I was about to interject because it is really, it's disconcerting having people talk nearby.
Yeah.
My apologies for not acting
And I would
sooner.
absolutely encourage folks who need to have a conversation to step outside the room if that's what they would like to do, but not at the table. And so I really think our immigration and migration goals are at stake if we don't solve the quest around affordable housing. In my constituency, parents are concerned that their children will never be able to live in the community they grew up in. That they won't, people aren't able to find either rental or houses or housing to buy that they can afford, where they grew up. There are public servants, dual income couples who can't afford housing in this province. The more that we stress people around rental rates, the less their sort of ability to do all the things that we want people to be able to do and think about having children and all that sort of stuff is really imperiled. And I'm also concerned, I'm sure we all saw, and I've certainly been thinking about this a lot, about the lack of affordable housing and a lack of rentals for folks who are in situations of domestic violence or other types of unsafe situations. So, I know people are always like, well, we see all the tents around Halifax, that's really concerning. You know who I'm actually more concerned about? I'm actually more concerned about folks who are in violent relationships within their homes and they can't leave because they call for help and there are no spaces in the shelter. And there are no spaces in the shelter because there's no ability for folks to move out of the shelter into affordable housing. And so really, people are being left with pretty critical decisions. I'm concerned about young people who are being exploited because they're sleeping on people's couches, and they know that the options are a tent or a couch, but that affordable housing they're waiting for. So, you know, I'm really concerned about the folks that we don't see, and in those situations. You know, I think as well, I mean, we're hearing from increasingly numbers of seniors who have never struggled for housing in their life. This has never been a concern. They have always been securely housed. And certainly in Halifax, if you look at the most recent point in time survey in terms of homelessness, like there's an enormous amount of seniors who report not having ever struggled with this before. And also, you know, just all the complex issues that fall out from these two areas of affordable housing and homelessness. So the Halifax point in time survey, I mean, 30% of homeless folks who were contacted during that survey report being former youth in care in this province. I mean, that is a devastating statement on the policies and the structure that we have provided people. I think it's a devastating, we can say that our child welfare system, by that outcome, is a failure. And so these are the types of issues that we need to hear about, and we need to hear about them in depth. So I mean, honestly, I won't even go into students, but I mean, I think, in my opinion, this could be 3 topics, because I think student housing is an issue, a critical issue on its own. We're still waiting for housing strategy. We're waiting for a student housing strategy. We haven't seen those from the government. And yet at the same time, more and more people are struggling. People are to maintain safe housing. People, you know, are living in, you know, if you go on Facebook Marketplace, when people are renting out their hallways in their apartments in Halifax, if you go door to door in my riding, there's like 6 people in 1-bedroom apartments. And, you know, if anyone wants to come along with me, they can do that. But I just think we really owe it now. It is a critical time to give these issues the attention they're due, and to at least have 2 specific sessions, one on affordable housing and one on homelessness.
Thank you, Mr. Shantz. Mr. Taggart.
Thank you, Chair. And I have to get, I'm going to make a motion here if I could. You know, we absolutely,
There's already
or an amendment to the motion, I'm sorry, an amendment to the motion. I mean, we truly, you know, understand the challenges faced with respect to housing and students, and so I move to amend to split the topics to investments in affordable housing programming with the following witnesses: Deputy Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, Chair Executive Panel on Housing and HRM, and the Deputy Minister of Community Services. Secondly, I move the student housing needs be added to as a separate topic with the following witnesses: the Deputy Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing and Deputy Minister of Advanced Education. I so move.
Okay. Mr. McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And what I would say is there are people and stakeholders missing from that list. Homelessness is, and the housing issue, and I just want to pull something up quickly, is a multi-jurisdictional issue. We know that. And how do we know that? Because, again, I'm just going to use this government's words. September 14th, 2023, Premier calls on HRM Council to roll up their sleeves and get to work on housing. That's what the Premier of Nova Scotia has said. He said, you know, you look stomping your feet and pointing at somebody else. No, he said during the news conference following a cabinet shuffle. Roll up your sleeves and get to work. Houston, and I'll table this, Houston encouraged members of council to look in the mirror and said he agrees with the federal government that it's time for municipal councils to step up on the housing file. There's lots of examples of HRM council dragging their feet on approvals that could see housing built, said Houston, adding that municipalities have sent construction fees through the roof, as he read from an itemized list of examples. Some of these fees have gone up 7 and 8 times, and every one of these fees land on the cost of housing. So to ask the question now, why is there not more affordable housing when, as a council, they have been jacking up what I would call these hidden taxes up through the roof? So nobody should be surprised that there's an affordability crisis. That was the words of the Premier of Nova Scotia, where he said that...
And I will ask Mr. McGuire
We will table that.
to table that,
Yeah.
or your researcher.
Where he said the responsibility, he clearly said that the responsibility lays on HRM and City Council for this. So again, we're about to have a discussion on investment in affordable housing when the Premier himself has tried to say, this isn't me, this is you. And the response, and I will have this tabled, Madam Chair, HRM Halifax councillor says Nova Scotia, again, this is CBC on September 15th. Halifax councillor says Nova Scotia's Premier housing comments based on sheer ignorance. They're taking issue with the Premier Houston's laundry list and complaints about the city's failures. He said, what I found interesting was the sheer ignorance of the Premier when it comes to this topic. So I guess when you don't know very much, it's easy to get emotional about an issue, Councillor Sean Cleary said Friday. He said it's unclear whether it's Houston personally who is not up to speed or the minister himself. So Mr. Cleary, Councillor Cleary went on to say some of the things that HRM has done. He said the planning process is actually not as burdensome on most developments, particularly the type of developments we want, which are more financially sustainable and more environmentally sustainable. The stuff where you're, bulldozing force and putting up all new infrastructure, that will take some time. So what we have now in HRM, we have the Premier of the province pointing fingers at City Council, and City Council pointing fingers back. Enough. Enough. And now we want to have a discussion about affordable housing and the housing crisis here without HRM. I'm assuming they're going to vote no against this. They don't want HRM to appear. They don't want the different stakeholders. We seen in the last one where they voted against certain witnesses. But I think what we need to do here is we need, as individuals, there's 9 of us around this table that are elected officials. We need to step up and show leadership on this file because it's impacting each and every one of us. And we need to stop pointing fingers and saying this is a liberal, conservative, NDP issue. We need to stop pointing fingers and say this is a municipality or federal issue or a provincial issue. What we need to do is say enough is enough. Sit in the bloody room, stop pointing fingers at each other, and figure out what needs to be done. And I know the response is going to be the same. They're not part of the government, and they don't get public funding. Well, that's the short-term view. The long-term view is that when people are homeless or underhoused, they have significantly more healthcare issues. They end up in the justice system. They end up on income assistance. So there is massive implications to this. Massive implications. And so I'm hoping that the government of the day will see the importance of having HRM, a representative from HRM, from City Council, and or my motion would be, Madam Chair, is to amend the witness list to include a representative from City Council and or a representative from the Municipal Housing Authority to come in here and talk about the issues they're facing so that we don't have the bloody municipality pointing fingers and the province pointing it back. In the meantime, we have over 200 tents that they know of. When hurricanes happen, there's nowhere for them to go. And I will quote the Premier from 2 winters ago when he said, winter is coming. Everybody remembers that in the legislature. Winter is coming, and we're going to do something. We're going to make sure.
Question.
No? No, I have the right to continue to talk. So we have...
He's got the floor.
I asked for a point of order, so okay.
So Madam Chair, the Premier himself said 2 years ago that winter was coming and that this issue would be solved. What we've seen is an explosion of homelessness in Nova Scotia and in HRM. We had the Minister of Community Service at the time say that she visited the tent sites and then tell me that she drove by. A drive-by is not a visit. So we know that this issue's gotten larger. We know that this issue is becoming more and more. We have a Minister of Advanced Education saying when international students are coming to this province, it's not his problem, it's not his issue. So the common denominator here is, the common theme, I should say here, is finger pointing. So when international students come to this province and they have nowhere to go, not my fault. It's CBU, it's Dalhousie, it's the Mount St. Vincent. When people are struggling to find a place to live in HRM, and I use HRM as an example because that is who the Premier picked to fight with, our biggest municipality. And the member from Colchester North can laugh, but I just got a text message from one of the councillors who said the government and the minister is refusing to meet with City Council and has refused to meet with them. So if that's not picking a fight, I don't know what is. And I think, Madam Chair, I think if some of these people around this table had actually been homeless at some point in their life and felt that helplessness, they would have a little bit more urgency to this. And instead of pointing fingers and saying it's your fault, we have an opportunity to actually come together. And I'll tell you this, go on social media and talk about housing and homelessness. And you know, every single response, I have 9,000 people sitting on my Facebook today and my social media. You know what the response is? Stop pointing fingers and work together.
Mr. McGuire, we have a point of order, so I wanted to let you to sort of, no, afterwards, yes, we will, but I'm going to let Mr. McDonald make his point of order.
Just Madam Chair, you can't have an amendment on an amendment. You'd have to deal with the first one, and then Mr. McGuire would be able to amend it after the point. We haven't voted on. No, you can amend a motion. You can't do an amendment to amendment. That's all I just want.
You can do a sub-amendment.
That's what we did earlier.
We did that earlier.
Oh, okay. Well, so that's kind of weird. I've never seen it. So if we.
We just did it at this meeting. I swear to God. I swear to God. Back to Mr. McGuire.
So again,
He wasn't here.
I think what needs to happen is we need to set the example.
We did it.
If nobody will set the example, then we need to set the example. If nobody in the federal government, if nobody in the provincial government, and nobody in the municipalities, everybody's claiming it's everyone else's fault, then why not set the example here? Why not get everybody here, sitting here?
This is clearly out of doubt.
No, it's not.
So can I call the question?
So why not, Madam
No, he's
Chair?
still speaking. You can't.
Madam Chair, why not have those people appear here in this committee, and then we actually leave this committee with clarification? Wouldn't that be nice? Wouldn't that be nice to actually have the province and the municipality sitting in the same room, and when they point fingers, we as committee members can challenge them. We can challenge their statements. Because the Premier himself said, this is on the municipality. They need to roll up their sleeves and get to work. And the answer from the municipality was, we're spending lots of money, we're spending lots of time, and the response from the province is, it's your fault. So again, I will say this. If you're not spending adequately on housing, and another thing that came out is the Premier himself and the Minister have said there's going to be no investment in public housing. There's no investment. And that is truly affordable housing. There's no investment in public housing coming from this government. And we can blame past governments, and we can say, you know what? It's your fault we're in this mess. But guess what? You know what leadership is? Is taking responsibility, finding solutions, and finding answers. Bad leadership is pointing at other people, and that's what we've gotten here.
Mr. McGuire, we have another point of order. I do try to let you sort of finish your thought there when we hear those. Mr. Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. With all respect to these very important issues at hand, we're talking future policy, and within the mandate of this committee, it's a backwards-looking committee well, it is a point of order because
What's your point of order?
my point of order is we're outside what the mandate of the committee is, and all the issues you're talking, tremendously important, but there's other avenues. There's other committees that talk about policy. There's the legislature, there's law amendments. I'd just like to get back to the mandate of the committee and move on with our business here.
Thank you, Mr. Young. Of course, your point about backward-looking is absolutely taken, but backward-looking could include last week. So your point on that is certainly taken, and again, I do think that some of these issues can be dealt with by giving clear instructions to our witnesses when they come, and that could include that this looks at what the past investments have been. It is not about policy going forward. So I think we have to keep that sort of in mind when we are inviting witnesses. And I think that with the committee's help, I can keep witnesses on track for that kind of thing. It's not always what we've done here, but I think that we could do that with the assistance of the committee. So, Mr. McGuire, you were speaking.
I just, Madam Chair, what really boggles my mind is that we continue to do this dance here in public accounts where we say we're going to work on behalf of the people of Nova Scotia, and then when we ask for witnesses and individuals to come forward that are going to be part of the solution, you cannot tell me. You cannot tell me part of the solution is heavy investment from both the province and the municipality and the federal government. And it's
Mr. McGuire, so I'm just going to point out that Mr. Young's intervention, because I'm not sure it was a point of order, but his intervention was that we need to be talking about the past. So if you could narrow your remarks a bit to talking about the past, I think that would give maybe the government members some comfort here that well, it's not about comfort, but again, this is the mandate of the committee, so we want to make sure that we are adhering to that mandate. It is not about future, but it can be about where we are or where we were last week, because that's the past, right? Where we are now, that's present, and then we have future. Mr. McGuire.
And then we're going to run out of time.
Again, what I will say is this, is that why not include all the stakeholders to talk about why we are here today? In fact, I would say, Madam Chair, that this would not look, it probably wouldn't reflect too poorly on the current government. That's what I don't get. Like, I'm sitting here knowing that I was in power for 8 years as part of a majority government, and we would receive heavy criticism, I'm sure. So why not, if we are willing to, if I'm willing to bring those witnesses forward knowing that it opens us up to criticism, why won't they? Because the truth is that we are hearing from city councilors in HRM that in the past they have requested meetings with the department, with this government, to help deal with the current housing crisis, and it has fallen on deaf ears. And again, I go, like, we need to start taking a more holistic approach to this stuff. The investments that are made in the past, or lack of investments when it comes to public housing, Madam Chair?
Maybe we should call it recess.
No?
No, I think if you want to have a conversation, maybe just step outside, okay? Because it really is, particularly for those of us who have hearing impairments, et cetera, it can be really disconcerting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, why not have the conversations of the decisions that were made in the past? And I think that's what Nova Scotians are looking for. If we want to talk about past looking and to the investments of the future, Nova Scotians are looking for people to step up and say, we've learned from our mistakes, we know where we're at today, put the partisanship aside. Put the partisanship aside and have these meetings. And we have the opportunity, each and every one of us have the opportunity to find solutions that will, and learn from the mistakes of the past to make sure that we deal with housing. But what's happening right now is there's just a refusal to even look back a day, a week, a month, a year. Like, I don't get that. And it's very frustrating to me when I have, each and every day, I am dealing with people from not just my community, but right across this province that are coming to my and from some of these people in this room, from their ridings, from their communities, are coming to my office and saying, where do I go? I bet you if I asked each and every member here, very few of them know that the waiting list for housing right now is about 5,000. 5,000. In the past, to comment for the member for Chebucto, Halifax Citadel, talked about, God forbid, women fleeing dangerous situations. We've had lots of that come into my office, and we were able to go and put them in housing because there's a urgent housing list. Do you know what that wait list is now? It's over a year. It's over a year is what's happening. So when we start to have the discussions about why we're at where we're at, instead of showing leadership, we had the Premier of Nova Scotia, the most powerful person in Nova Scotia, say, roll up your sleeves and get to work. Which just inflames and says, and it talks down to the Mayor of Halifax and to city councillors. That's what it is. When you're saying that roll up your sleeves and get to work, what does that say to you? That you're not doing your job? So what we need is we need to bring somebody.
Order. Mr. Young, if you think that this is unbelievable, I suggest you watch some past Public Accounts Committee meetings. It's not unbelievable. Mr. McGuire. Mr. McGuire, I would note that time is running, is coming along. We have 7 minutes left. I do have a speakers list of Ms. LeBlanc, Ms. Barkhouse, and Mr. Young. Mr. McGuire.
And thank you, Madam Chair. And I know that some of the members are annoyed. They're annoyed that I'm sitting here and I'm irritated and I'm upset about the current situation. And it's painful for them to listen to this. But you know what's actually painful? Living in a tent in the middle of the winter. Not being able to find a place in the middle of a storm. Having your animals. There was a recent article where people are having to give up their animals, their family pets, because of the lack of affordable housing and landlords refusing now to take pets. And I think there's a disconnect. And something, and I will say this again, and I've said this a few times, I feel like there's this disconnect. Once you get into government, it's not about for the people, it's for the party. And if people really cared about what's happening in our own backyards and how we've gotten there, we would call a proper list of witnesses. It wouldn't just be government-friendly witnesses. And that's what's going to happen here. We're going to have a fight about why should Adsum House be able to come. We're going to have a fight about the North End Community Health Centre. We're going to have a fight about people that the government depends on to provide services, housing services at a cheaper price, because that's what it is. Not-for-profits can take $1 and stretch it into $5. And government can't. So they look to Adsum House, and they look to the North End Community Health Center. They look to Phoenix House. They look to Homebridge Youth Society. They look to Metro Turning Point. And they say, provide us with these services that we can't provide because we will spend way more money. And then when we say to them, let's bring them in. Let's have a discussion with them to figure out what needs to be done and where they believe the changes could have been made. We have a government that says, no, we don't want to hear from them. We don't want to hear from them. And so, Madam Chair, I do think that part of this today is we either truly believe in working together with all of our stakeholders, not just the friendly ones, not just the ones that are going to pat each other on the back and say you did a great job. And do we really want to know the horrific truth of homelessness and the housing crisis that's happening here in Nova Scotia, in each and every one of your communities? Or do we want to cover our eyes and plug our ears and only listen to the people that say, you're doing a great job, you're the best? So we have a decision to make here today. Are we open to criticism as a committee? Are we open to learning as a committee? Or is it going to be the same old BS as usual, where people use...
Mr. McGuire?
Yep.
I'm pretty sure BS is not parliamentary, although I do appreciate that you did use the initials. Yes. So,
Okay.
Mr. McGuire?
So is it going to be the same old, where we continue to plug our ears, cover our eyes, and then when we go back into the legislature, we hear things like, we did a $2 million investment on this, and we did a $3 million investment on this, and this many people are able to... And one of the very concerning issues around housing that this government is directly responsible for, is the rent subsidies, and changing it from 30% to 50% to be eligible after saying they didn't have enough money. And they had a $116 million surplus that could have went to helping all those Nova Scotians. This was directly on them. Directly on them. And you want to talk about looking in the past? There you go. I just gave you something, Madam Chair. So, again, they may think it's grandstanding, but clearly they're not sitting in their communities talking to people that are struggling every single day. They don't. I don't know how many tents they see when they drive to work, and the explosion of it. And those people don't care if you're conservative, liberal, or NDP. They don't care. They just want somebody to step up instead of flapping their gums and being critical of everybody around them, and step up and actually do something. $116 million was left on the table that could have been built public housing, that could have done rent subsidies, that could have made changes in people's lives. And instead, they did nothing with it. Nothing.
Mr. McGuire, could we maybe vote on your motion at this time?
So,
I don't even know what the motion is.
Mr. McGuire,
so my motion,
the sub-amendment
is that we allow HRM, someone from City Council and somebody from the housing and HRM, to be added to this list of witnesses so that we get the full picture and we finally get people to step up and sit in a room and come up with real answers.
And so that is an amendment to this sub-amendment to the amendment which was the government sub-amendment, is that correct? All right. So
My comments are for the...
Ms. LeBlanc.
Madam Chair, I would be happy to call the question on this sub-amendment. My comments are for the amendment.
Okay. All right. Let's do the sub-amendment. All those in favor of...
Wait, that's the speaker's list here.
Okay, yeah.
That is, well, then Ms. LeBlanc will be up.
It's 11 o'clock. Is there agreement to?
Is there agreement to extend the meeting?
No, we have another meeting.
Okay.
Isn't there a counter protest to attend, folks? Hope that everybody is going to.
Say the meeting's adjourned.
The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.